Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us today for a very special global inspirational Women in Mining alumni and sponsor networking event. My name is Simone Chandel and I am head of events at Women in Mining UK. Before we officially start today's event, I'd like to run through our usual notes to help us make today's event an enjoyable one. Your mics are currently on mute. If you could be so kind to keep your mics on mute during the discussion, that would be greatly appreciated. Your cameras may be turned off. Please feel free to switch those on now. As you all know by now, today is about being able to network with our fellow colleagues in the breakout rooms, and I'll be sharing more details on the 2 different breakout room sessions shortly. But we'll also be taking a group screenshot after the discussion, so watch out for that. So a week later, and we're still digesting the takeaways and gaps from COP26. Was it a triumph? Perhaps not, but it wasn't a failure either. With 197 countries committing themselves to further accelerating their decarbonization plans and strengthening their emissions reduction targets for 2030 by next year, rather than in 2025, one thing that was evident was the need to hear more from the industries that are the biggest contributors to climate change and climate action. We thought this sponsor networking event would be the perfect opportunity for us to discuss the key takeaways from COP26 and what that means for our industry moving forward. It gives me great pleasure, therefore, to introduce you to Dr. Sarah Gordon, CEO at Satarla, who will lead us into today's event. Sarah co-founded Satarla in 2014 and is an honorary lecturer at Imperial College London and a research associate at the University of Johannesburg. Voted as one of our WIM 100s in 2016, she is also a trustee of Geology for Global Development and attended COP26. Sarah, thanks for joining us, and I'd like to hand over now so you can lead us into today's sponsored discussion.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Simone. And it's a true joy to be here with all of you. Really good to see some familiar faces sitting around our virtual dialogue table that we have here today. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion. As Simone says, I had the distinct pleasure to attend COP26 on behalf of the Geological Society as an observer, and I'll be sharing some of my thoughts over the course of the next hour or so. However, I'm going to start off by introducing our wonderful panel that we have with us. And so to kick off things, I'm going to come to Sonia first, and after Sonia, I'm then going to pass across to Alex. So Dr. Sonia van Ballaert from IBM. Sonia, do you want to give a little bit of a background to yourself, and then we'll go to Alex?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sarah, and very exciting to be here again. We've met a few times over the past year. I'm IBM's executive sponsor for the WIM 100. Always lovely to see the brilliant ladies again. My day job is actually being the global client director for Shell as a big energy company, actually serving the mining industry. And I'm also on our global industry group for all the hard to abate sectors. And there I lead the charge on sustainability and decarbonization. Nice to be here.
Fabulous. Thank you very, very much, Sonia. Really good to have you with us. Alex, do you want to give a little bit of a background to yourself and everything that you get up to at BMO? And then we're going to go to Marc.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Simone, for inviting me to be part of this discussion today. So, yeah, my name is Alex Pearce. I work for the Bank of Montreal. I work in the mining equity research team, so I cover companies from the diversified majors down to kind of the smaller cap uranium names and base metal names as well. And so, you know, from the research point of view, so we have a global franchise, and we look at all aspects of mining and deal with investors on a day-to-day basis.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Alex. As always, it is always fabulous when we have you here with us. Great. Marc, do you want to say hello and maybe give a bit of background to what you get up to with BCG, and then we will finish off with the fabulous Tim.
Sarah, and yeah, also from my side, great to see many of you again. It's great to be having been part of many of these events. So I'm Managing Director and Partner out of our Singapore office. So I guess it's a good evening from my side. I lead our global mining sector from BCG. And personally, I work a lot in the sustainability area. So, I've been working a lot in climate sustainability more broadly over the last 7 years, in mining for the last 14 years. And I don't think I've done anything else other than sustainability and climate with our mining clients over the last 3 or 4 years. So this topic today is really very close to my heart. So looking forward to the discussion.
Fabulous. That's really great, Marc. Thank you so much for that. And last, but by no means least, Tim, do you want to say hello to everyone?
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, it's great to be with everyone. Again, Tim Jensen. I'm based in Toronto, where I work with Heidrick and Struggles. I lead our mining and metals practice in the Americas. I also have a global leadership role over our process industries sector. And Heidrick and I, we help senior leadership teams and we help boards find and employ the people that they need to help drive their strategy. And so we've been doing also a tremendous amount of work around ESG and sustainability as boards look for that skill set, as well as senior leadership teams. So looking forward to the discussion.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Tim. So as we can see, we have an awesome lineup for the discussion that we're going to hold over the next half an hour or so. And then I believe we're going to go for some interactive polls and then some breakout rooms as well. So we'll all be able to have a good natter about what everybody thinks about COP26. So from a personal perspective, and then I'm going to hand over pretty quickly to Marc to get his take, because I know that BCG were very closely involved in a lot of what was going on behind the scenes in Glasgow. So from my perspective, it was a true delight to go back to the city where I studied geology as an undergraduate. So going back to what is usually a fairly grim Glasgow, actually the sun was shining, which was truly wonderful and very surprising. But what we certainly saw from the inside of COP26 was that whilst the world's media was complaining about long queues and things like that to get into the venue, actually, don't tell anybody, but it wasn't actually that bad. It was just a bit like turning up at a busy airport. But I think through COVID, we've all forgotten what proper security is like. And so maybe that's why it was getting a bad press. The general vibe inside that blue zone, which was the United Nations-led negotiation area, it was actually a very collegiate and collaborative atmosphere. And so it was really fascinating seeing that dance between the negotiators from all of the different countries around the world, the observers who primarily came from non-government organizations, etc. And then, of course, the world's media, who were all there desperately listening into what everybody was saying to find that next story. So I found that just from I guess a fairly naive perspective, actually really interesting, seeing how all of this works at that level. Some of those key takeaways that I was very privileged to hear firsthand, so being there in the big announcement rooms when various announcements were made, that I really took home were things like the commitment with regards to deforestation, i.e. many of the world's countries in which deforestation has been an incredibly large problem, signing pledges to say, we're going to bring an end to this. So that, of course, including Brazil. So found that really exciting. Then also, of course, on day two, which was Energy Day, day two, which was Finance Day, that's when we heard the likes of Marc stand up and say the world's marketplace has pledged $130 trillion to help combat climate change. So eye-watering numbers. And there certainly wasn't any competition, I say, with a wry smile between the world's private markets and the governments, because of course we all knew the governments were aiming at 100 billion total. And of course, Marc Carney came out and went, ha, billions, let me give you trillions in terms of the amount of money that was perhaps being pledged to help all of this. But of course, you can talk about numbers that are as big as you like. The key thing that I think he perhaps put on the table was that greenification of finance, and what does that really mean? And what does that mean as well for those of us in the mining sector? The next thing that I'll mention here as well, of course, was a lot of chatter around the end of coal. And we saw the negotiations almost slide sideways in their final hours over, do we actually get rid of coal altogether? Or is it just a reining in on how much coal we use to power the world effectively? And of course, that means a huge amount to different nations. Perhaps the most exciting announcement that really came with that wasn't actually a central aspect aspect with regards to COP26. It was a peripheral agreement that was made between the US, the UK, and Europe and South Africa, where the first three regions effectively pledged $8.5 billion to South Africa to help South Africa reduce its reliance on coal-fired power. So things like that, which will stand the test of time separate to the COP agreements, personally, I found really interesting. And then finally, and I guess this is where the likes of Greta Thunberg, for example, is coming from, a lot of her manifesto, as it were, is all around a just transition. So as we move from non-renewable sources of power into the more renewable world, do we do that in such a way that it really strengthens the world, it addresses the full bandit of the Sustainable Development Goals rather than just climate change, and so making sure that it truly is that just transition. So personally, I took a lot away from it in general. From a mining perspective, the main thing I took away was that mining wasn't mentioned. In that particular forum, mining means coal mining. It doesn't mean copper mining, rare earth element mining, etc. So I found that this was absolutely fascinating, that big pledges and commitments were being made, but nobody was talking about the raw materials, at least in the forums that I had a privilege to be a part of. What does that mean? It means there is a massive and really exciting opportunity for all of us to lean into this discussion and be a part of it. I know that a lot of the mining press has been fairly anti-COP, but actually I see this personally as being an opportunity. Perhaps that's because I'm originally an exploration geologist. I see it as an opportunity rather than a threat. However, with regards to all of this, those were my quick perspectives. Marc, perhaps from yourself, from a BCG perspective, it'd be really interesting to hear if you guys actually agreed in the slightest with what I saw, or have had a totally different outlook with regards to that. And after Marc, we'll slide across to Alex. So Marc, how about yourself?
Yeah, so I don't think I disagree with any of what you just said. And maybe just to give you all a sort of a bit of a, I guess, a picture of how we look into COP26, which is probably in some ways looking from inside out, because we were the lead, or are the lead advisor to COP26, and we've been engaged in the preparation, since I guess over a year ago now. Even I guess in the original planning, when it was supposed to be in 2020. And I personally, I didn't have the privilege to be there in Glasgow to enjoy the nice weather. But I've been working very closely with the COP26 unit in Indonesia, and shaping some of the outcomes and the pledges and the commitments that were made over the last 2 weeks there. And I just personally, I think if I think about I guess the ups and downs over those 2 weeks, there's been obviously a lot of talk, and it seemed like there were two different views on this conference, right? So the glass, the glass quite full view and the glass very empty view, and I find myself somehow torn always between half full and half empty, to be honest. And in some ways, I think the recognition of the agreement at the end, I think a lot of companies that we all work for, are actually already a step ahead, to be honest, in many ways. Even I also engage with coal companies in this part of the world, which are obviously essential to not power just the economies today, but actually power the economic growth going forward. I think they already realized the writing on the wall, and they would have probably underwritten a phase out versus just a phase down, right? So, and I guess that's where sort of the political discussion and elements really come in. So in some ways, I look at and talking a lot to my colleagues who were actually on the ground in COP, and part of the negotiations. We facilitate a lot of conversations. We are part of the First Mover Coalition, which announced the start. I think it was in the first week. We kind of see that actually it's about the collective action of the corporates ultimately that's now driving things forward, right? And we see that both corporates and us as working in the corporates, as well as us as individuals in society, need to take this, I think, things in our hands and move it forward, right? So we've talked a lot about pledges and commitments. Now is the time for action, and I think a lot of politicians have also acknowledged this. And it's really up to us, I think, to put that to work.
Thank you for that, Marc. And again, massive congratulations to yourself and your team for being able to keep those negotiations moving forwards and come to a really great resolution at the end. So that was brilliant. Just on that topic of action, I'm going to come across to Alex now and say, okay, so as I mentioned, one of my really exciting areas, I think, was that greenification of finance. And what does that really mean? Because I think that by changing that world of finance, that is a massive active lever to be able to pull. Alex, perhaps from your perspective in the BMO side, do you want to just discuss that slightly?
Sure, yeah, so I think actually one of the most significant aspects of all of COP26 was just the sheer number of attendees. And if you look versus the previous version, obviously, I think that's actually a pretty fair reflection of just the growing importance of ESG in general, but also within the investment community. And, just from my discussions over the last few years with clients, you've seen this snowballing and becoming a bigger part of what we do. And, I think COVID, particularly last year, actually drove people to reevaluate what was important in life, and that's really had a big impact in our discussions. So specifically in mining, and you mentioned there wasn't an awful lot of chat outside of coal there, but we have seen mining companies already increasing their focus on ESG, and I think it's events like COP26 that demonstrate this does need to continue, and it's increasingly apparent that they need to publicly state their targets and all the achievements they've had, but also manage failures and talk about how what's gone wrong. It's not just E, it's S and G and everything else. So if they don't do that, they're more and more likely to lose out on this larger pool of capital going forward. So it's really important that companies are in front of it. And like you mentioned, we saw a glimpse of some of the potential capital at play with Marc Carney's announcement. However, it's certainly not front and center of everyone's radar. We have this growing capital. There's still some investors that probably care less about it. And I think that does make it challenging for mining companies to balance the needs of all shareholders and adequately put that capital to work in the right places. Then obviously just turning to maybe a more specific topic, obviously decarbonisation, and you mentioned the pledge to phase down thermal coal. Obviously it's important to remember that many companies were obviously trying to push harder there than perhaps the end result, but it does reinforce our view anyway that thermal coal is on a long-term negative trajectory overall. So what does that mean for mining companies right now? Well, obviously we've seen mining companies moving out of thermal coal assets due to shareholder pressure, but on the other side of the equation there's got to be someone picking up those assets, and mining companies taking a bigger share of thermal coal assets. And I think that poses a really interesting question for how should investors think about this phase down in thermal coal in the near term and the long term. Maybe the long term's easier, but the near term is harder. And I think you can't turn it off straight away. You still need to extract it, and they still need capital from somewhere. So essentially, if the phase down is going to be done responsibly, it needs to be responsibly managed in some way. So I think, and that's by companies that answer to shareholders, not private companies or maybe some state-owned enterprises that maybe don't have the same checks and balances you'd have if it was a listed company. So, you know, is it better to be a responsible seller, or is it better to be a responsible manager of these assets? I think is the key question for me.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you there, Alex. I think there is a very big strategic question here in terms of what do you view as being more important, that almost that carbon footprint that perhaps you have as a company, and watching things like the task force for carbon related financial disclosure coming in, obviously, which as of next year in the UK, all large companies are going to have to be reporting on, or is it, and it doesn't need to be mutually exclusive, but is it that kind of, okay, well, we know that we still need to mine coal, do we do it in that more responsible manner? And then, of course, then going sideways into all of those other commodities as well. Sonia, perhaps if I can bring you in on this, and maybe more from that sort of technology sense, and getting that data to really say, okay, well, who is actually operating in a responsible manner? How do we get that transparency, especially through that value chain? Do you have any comments on that?
Yes, of course. And Sarah, I mean, you're right to pick up the word transparency, because that's also the word that I picked up from the COP, right? It's one thing to make these claims and even to claim actions. It's another thing to, you know, have trustworthy data that show actually progress. And so as much as mining is a very physical activity, you know, with assets and people on the ground, I think what we will see following on from, you know, the need to really make progress on decarbonization is an increased digitalization of mining. In other words, we need to understand not just at an annual, on an annual basis and in a glossy report, you know, what the progress was. We actually need to know where we are on the ground every day in terms of, you know, controlling emissions with data that show you what can be done, you know, whether it's less idling of machines or optimization of routes, or, you know, progress that you can make on the technologies that you use on the equipment, and all of the arsenal of interventions that can actually reduce the footprint of operations. The other thing I would like to actually bring in, oh, I'm sorry, the light just went out in the room here. I'm in the dark. Sorry, I need to move.
That's brilliant. Sonia is doing her bit with regards to reducing her power usage. Just while Sonia goes and turns the lights on again, perhaps Tim, if I can bring you in on this discussion as well. Actually, so Sonia's back with us, but Tim, what I will come on to you with is a bit around the so this transition, what does it mean for skill sets? And that really being a really core part of what a lot of the people who are sitting outside of COP26 were talking about, and actually were in full agreement with many of the people inside COP26. Everybody was talking about that skills transition and making sure that larger groups of people aren't hurt. But before I come on to that question, I'm going to come back to Tanya, who's turned her lights on again. Sorry, Tanya. Sorry, Sonia.
The lights on again, yes. So, you know, I remember a report from Rocky Mountain Institute published a few years ago, and they said there are 3 big things that miners can do to decarbonize. And obviously energy efficiency, which I've just touched on, is one thing. Abandoning thermal coal is the second, of course. But the third thing that they really mentioned as a very important short-term intervention as well is to really control methane emissions, very noxious greenhouse gas. And there were declarations at COP, you know, about methane, but it wasn't, I don't think, explicitly mentioned in relation to mining. So I do think that that is a huge area of both, you know, technological advances that can still be made, and ESG responsibility that needs to be taken, and also proper, transparent and trustworthy reporting on that.
So with that, Sonia, I mean, obviously you're doing a lot of work with Shell at the moment, and an area, for example, that I've been a little bit involved in has been that, you know, kind of ability to use a lot of the infrastructure that's been put in place for oil and gas to actually just reverse the direction of the pumping of those gases to bump carbon, methane, etc., back into those reservoirs as carbon sequestration. Is there anything you want to comment on that? Because there was definitely quite a lot of discussion almost on in the pavilions within COP26 around carbon sequestration and almost the transition within the oil and gas sector.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's very promising technology. It has been proven to be safe as well, right? There are huge installations already. And it's a technology just like hydrogen that really needs to get scaled up, and where we need technology transfer indeed from industry that have gone before, right? And I think, I mean, you're a geologist, Sarah, there's still a lot of progress being made in terms of the carbon capture properties, of the various subsurface. And the ability to store CO2 and other emissions safely. So, and the IEA has reinforced time and again that we will need this technology, as an offset, right? So, yeah, I think this is it's an area of synergy between energy companies, oil and gas, and mining, particularly, as I said, hydrogen as well. So I see a lot of synergies between these two industries, emerging soon.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Sonia. And thank you also for illustrating the wonderful way in which we can reduce our power usage. Tim, as promised, I'll come across to yourself now in terms of that skills transition and how perhaps we gear up for all of that.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I think, on the skills transition side, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity in the mining space at the moment. There's also a phenomenal amount of demand for people with experience and expertise and a view on this particular area and ESG in particular. I think at a board level, ESG is the number one thing that every board that we talk to is talking about in terms of equipping the board with a perspective. I think if I'm honest, though, many of those conversations, whether it's, bringing someone on to lead ESG or sustainability for an organization or bringing someone onto a board, a lot of those conversations are still somewhat reactionary. And Sarah, I think what you shared and said really resonated around the opportunity that there is for the mining industry to really lean in and be a leader in this area. I think the capital markets have been a phenomenal force for good to date, and it's the one thing the boards and senior leadership teams consistently talk about in terms of why we need to do this is because we won't be able to get funding if we don't. And I think that's a great thing. It's the market working in a really effective way, but there's also an opportunity for leaders within the sector, within the corporates, Marc, that you were talking about, that have done some good work to still lean in a more meaningful way and provide a greater vision and commitment to take that, what's been said and convert it into action. So there's still going to be a tremendous amount of demand in the mining industry. We're starting to see people in oil and gas kind of repurpose themselves to come and work in the mining industry, as there's going to be a significant amount of capital that's going to flow into materials that are going to be sourced to help with the energy transition. You can think of the coppers, the nickels, the lithiums, all of these types of things. As a good example of that, we're doing some work at the moment with the World Bank to help them bring their mining practice leader into the World Bank. And the real two mandates for this group, it's specifically for the IBRD component of the World Bank, are helping countries close coal mines and helping developing countries extract minerals that are associated with the energy transition. So I think we're going to see a continued amount of demand for leaders, and I think for everyone on this call, it'll serve us well to be really smart in these areas and understand what the issues are. But I think there's also a real opportunity for mining corporates and us as leaders to be more proactive than reactive to the markets in terms of creating the vision for why we're going to change and how we're going to change.
Brilliant. I couldn't agree with you more on that, Tim. I think that there are just acres of opportunity here. And also, I mean, the time is now for the mining sector, or whether we call ourselves the raw materials sector, whatever, however we brand ourselves, it doesn't really matter. We know that if any of these pledges have a chance to actually be delivered on, we need to increase the volume of materials that we're pulling out the ground. But we have to, of course, be able to do that in a responsible manner. I think we've all seen lots of the different statistics in terms of how much we need to increase production by. But perhaps just in the last 5 minutes, if we could do a quick whip around the panel and say, okay, if we could suggest one thing to the broader mining sector in terms of something we need to change to take advantage of this opportunity that is in front of us, what would that thing be? And Marc, I'm going to come to you first on that, but just while you're thinking, I mean, from a personal perspective, I see that the whole world needs massive volumes of this rock. A lot of those minerals and metals come from the likes of the developing world. They don't necessarily need to come from large scale mining. They can come from small scale and artisanal mining, for example. And perhaps there needs to be that rethink actually in terms of how do we do this properly so it provides the most value to as many people as possible, not just now, but over the long term. So once we hit the post-closure stages of those particular assets. But Marc, how about yourself? And then we'll go across to Alex.
Yeah, I mean, and I think we hit a lot of very important points over the last 20 minutes, right? So, and as you highlighted, Sarah, there was not much talk about mining per se at COP26, but we are at the front of all value chains, right? So if somebody in automotive is talking about scope 3 emission reductions, it's about mining, right? If somebody's talking about, scope 3 emission reductions in electronics, they're talking about mining. I mean, it's really across the whole value chain. Maybe the only place we don't play a role is maybe in food, in some ways. But I guess you could, if you go all the way down to potash and phosphate, maybe, we're also there in some ways. So I think, the mining sector is ultimately really, I guess at the forefront of all of this, or in the center, or however you want to call it. And as you also just highlighted, obviously the sector itself is quite diverse, right? In terms of composition between, the big, large miners, mid-tier, smaller tier, and then down all the way to artisanal. I do think, the larger end of the sector really though needs to lead here, right? In terms of how does mining of the future basically look like from a sustainability perspective, and what does that mean? What does that look like? And I think what was quite interesting to me, like looking at the panel, is one of our things we say is your climate needs to be embedded in every function, in every part of the organization. And in some ways, we just spoke about this, right? So, Sonia was coming more from the technology side. Obviously, we need to embed it into the technology function of every company, right? So Tim spoke more about the people side. We need to embed it in the HR side. Alex obviously talked about finance. It's an integral part of finance. I guess I come more from the business strategy side. So it's really important that it's an integral part of every decision making, and of everything that every one of us does every day. And I think only then can any company, large, small, really lead this. And again, coming back to what I said earlier, and then I'll stop, is that the corporates and the individuals really need to lead this change, right? I think, we can't wait for governments to basically, show the way. I think we need to lead the way, otherwise it'll be too late.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Marc. And I agree with you in terms of that. How do you keep going upstream? So who are the people that really influence kind of what comes next? And so I'm really happy that I'm about to come to Alex next on this. So having worked in sustainability departments within some of the world's larger mining companies, being really cynical about it, you could be as sustainable as you wanted, but unless the people with the money actually cared, it was really difficult to get real traction. And that's just me being incredibly transparent and honest. But having spent the last 9 months or so doing increasing numbers of climate scenario analyses with regards to physical and transition risks for many different organizations, both mining and otherwise, TCFD is creating massive waves, and I think is beginning to drive some really awesome conversations inside mining companies. So Alex, over to yourself, and then I'll come across to Sonia.
So sorry, it may have been mentioned already, but I had a few working from home issues there. I lost connection for the last 5 minutes, but anyway. So I mean, For mining to be a big part of this change, they absolutely need capital, and to get the capital, the mining industry needs to do better at promoting what it can do well. And yes, we're talking about transition metals and maybe uranium and nuclear, and there's lots of different aspects to this, and like you said at the start, talking about thermal coal, everything is put into one bucket, and the general public, even investors that would consider themselves probably more up to speed on the sector, still struggle to make a difference between, let's say, met coal and thermal coal. And mining companies, I suppose, just need to do a better job at explaining the differences and what they can do, and pull the right levers, and just we also need to do a better job at teaching the general public who provides the money through pension funds or whatever. So that's the priority, really, I suppose, is just from my perspective, is just improving public awareness of the positive sides of the mining and what it can do and why it's important.
And just a follow-up question then to that, Alex, is so, and actually also building on what Marc was saying, where he was saying, the big companies need to lead the way. The problem there, however, is that it's typically junior companies or exploration companies that go and find the stuff. Very few of the big companies actually take those risks, as it were. And so therefore you've got very high risk companies, as it were, because it's very difficult to find this stuff. And I say that as an exploration geologist. It's not that we're really stupid, it's actually that it's quite difficult to go find it, especially a lot of the materials that are now called critical, because they're often byproducts, or they're found in really small quantities, or actually the engineers just need to become a bit more intelligent to be able to extract them from the rocks. And again, I say that with much love and respect to the world's engineering population. So Alex, is there anything that we can be doing from the financial world to help channel more of that cash or that capital into that front end exploration? Because at the moment, the rate of exploration hasn't even begun to kick up yet in terms of being able to meet the demand that's coming at us. Do you have any comments on that? And then I'll go to Sonia.
Well, I'll absolutely, I'll agree that it's really difficult. Because obviously there's so much more risk associated with that project at that point, because you may not find something that's actually at the end of the day makes money, and not all investment is there to make money, but a large part of it is, and that's obviously the problem. And that's the larger companies themselves haven't been given a license to really explore either. We've been through a long period of really, like you say, not putting a huge amount of money into exploring for these minerals, and we all know in mining how long it takes to go from nothing to something that resembles a mine. So it's a very, very difficult question. I mean, obviously it's easier if you're in an environment that's mining friendly and would be considered safe, but actually, again, some of those minerals aren't necessarily in those zones. So I suppose it's probably about teaching investors about the specific situation, and and unfortunately it will always be harder so to get the money.
So that wasn't a commitment just then from BMO to say, yeah, it's okay, we've got loads of cash to splash in exploration. I say that with a wink.
We do as much as we can to show off the opportunities there, but yeah.
No, and I mean, I think this is something, I mean, we've had conversations as well in the past, different avenues around exploration is getting more expensive, because you can't just go out and find a rock and go, woohoo, here's a copper mine. Actually, at those early stages, you have to be showing all of the focus on ESG, for example. And of course, a lot of the governance codes around the mineral resources reserves are now changing to reflect that as well. So it's almost a case there where exploration is risky, and it's also getting more expensive for good reasons, because we need to show that the ESG credentials, etc., in reality are coming in at those early stages.
And the permitting side of things is taking longer. And obviously, quite rightly, the stakeholders on the ground are getting more of a voice.
Yeah.
But that all adds to the time frame. So
Yeah.
it just makes it even harder.
And time is something we don't have any of, because we need to do all of this by 2050. So this is where I'm going to come to Sonia, because I'm sure there are some snazzy technology ideas that we can roll in here to speed things up. Or Sonia, do you have any just general comments? And then I'll finish off with Tim.
All right, yeah. So I was reflecting, as much as things take time and there's a risk averseness, this is also the best time ever to think truly innovation, and I would offer 3 domains where there can be incredible innovation. We touched already on, the CCUS and hydrogen and electrification of the whole mining system to make it more responsible. So to make the activity itself, more carbon neutral. I think that's one domain of great innovation that's coming. Secondly, we talked about digital, right? So what kind of digital innovations can we introduce to manage an increasingly, complex e-mine, if I like, with an electrified system. And then the third area of innovation, which we haven't talked about yet, is, how about circularity in mining? So if these, critical minerals and metals are so rare, what can you do in the business model to make the supply chain and the use of it and the recuperation of it, circular from the get-go, so that we don't need to unearth as much and still drive a profitable new business line in the mining company or for the sector. So that's just a thought on my side to take away.
No, it's brilliant, Sonia. And I think, building on that, I mean, the worst thing that we can do in terms of carbon footprint is go and open lots and lots and lots of new mines, when actually it's a case of we already have some mines open that have great byproducts that could be extracted from the same holes in the ground or from those waste piles, etc. How do we go and raid all of those? So brilliant, thank you. And just in closing, because I know that the Women in Mining team are desperate to open up a poll for all of us. Tim, do you have any final words of wisdom for us?
Probably not. But look, I think a lot of what everyone said resonates. And Sonia, I think you're spot on. Innovation is going to be critical. If we're going to address the challenges, whether it's in the exploration side, whether it's in the extraction side, whether it's going down the circular path for mining industries, we're going to have to do things differently to the way that we have done them in the past. And the mining industry has done a terrible job of that, speaking frankly, over the years. And I think, the risk of being cliche and certainly speaking to the choir, we've only leveraged, probably 60% of the population historically. And I think, if we're going to innovate, we're going to need to bring diverse ideas, people to the table, and it's going to be imperative on the mining industry that it can really leverage 100% of the world's population if we're going to get to those ideas. And so being able to attract women to the sector for sure is a consistent challenge that the industry hasn't also done well in, has made big strides, which we've been delighted to see and hopefully can play a role in. But we're going to need to continue to push that as well if we're going to be able to do things differently and address some of these challenges into the future.
With that, Eamon, Tim mentioned that word diverse. He's mentioned that women, put women, word women many times. So I think a massive round of applause to our fabulous panel for kicking off today's discussion. Lots more can be said, but I think that is absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much. Round of applause for all of you. Great.
And thank you, Sarah, and thank you to all our sponsor panelists for joining us. Now, Alex, you're not the only one who's having tech issues, because a few of us were actually dropped at one point. So we were all trying to log back on, and I'm the host. So I was a bit worried that you'd all dropped off, but you seem to be here. We are recording it. So whatever happens, we will make this recording available. So I am being flexible and adjusting the timings slightly. But with that in mind, if you would all put your cameras on, we always like to do this, and we always like to share this in our WIM 100 LinkedIn group. I'd love to take a screenshot so we can encourage more of the WIM 100 ladies to network with each others. Great. Now, that poll question that Sarah was talking about. So I'm going to launch this poll for you. You should see it come up. Did you feel that COP26 was just blah, blah, blah? You should all see that coming up on your screens now. course, I can see the answer on my side. It was either yes or no. I'll give that another couple of seconds. Right. Well, I'm really glad to hear this. Because no, you did not feel it was just blah, 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 which is great. Phew. Perfect. Right. Now, the whole point of today, obviously, is to go into the breakout rooms. I'm absolutely terrified. The minute we hit a sign, you're all going to disappear because we have had internet problems today. So this is going to be a bit of an experiment. We've done this many, many times before. We're going to keep the room as small as possible. I am going to assign about 3 to 4 participants per room. If you don't like your room, or you're in a room with someone you've been in before in the last couple months, jump back straight out. We'll try and put you into another room. But right now it looks like I'm going to be assigning 6 breakout rooms of 3 to 4 participants. We're going to just reduce the time, make it about 11 minutes per session. Then we'll bring you all back. And then we'll put you back into another breakout room for another 11 minutes, and that should hopefully bring us up to about 5:15. If anybody needs to drop off now, that's absolutely fine. No problem at all. I'm going to go ahead now and create these rooms. But like I said, if you need to jump back out, just let me know. And of course, as usual, introduce yourselves. If you're one of our sponsors and if you're one of our WIM 100s, introduce yourselves. Let us know your thoughts on COP26. Here we go. See you on the other side. Great. Right, we've lost 1 or 2 of you, but I think everybody has slowly come back. You will have seen I've been typing into the chat function that we have a little Mentimeter for you. When you have a moment, you don't have to do it right now, you can do it after the event. Please go to menti.com and type in code 76520-520 and let us know your thoughts about what the industry should be doing post COP26. We'd love to be able to share that with our members and all our WIM 100s on our social media platforms to start a conversation. We're now going to throw you back into breakout room session 2, but I'm going to change it up a little bit because I'm conscious that our groups were small. We're now going to increase the groups. I'm going to recreate the rooms. I'm going to assign 3 rooms between 5 to 6 participants, and that will take us up to about 5:15 GMT. Now, Sarah, I know you and I are actually meant to be on a different panel discussion at 5:30 for the Geological Society Early Careers Network. So if you have to drop off at any time, feel free to. I will say my thank yous to you now because I am conscious you might want to just prepare for that. But I'll let everybody else go into their breakout rooms, and then we come back. I will share some info about the next WIM 100, the final WIM 100 event coming up in December rather. So here we go, 3 breakout rooms with 5 to 6 participants. See you on the other side. Welcome back, everybody. We're gonna let you all come back in. Sarah, I know you've got to disappear shortly. It's cutting it close. Right, looks like most of you are back, which is great. Now, obviously, this was a little bit of a bigger room this time around. So if you didn't get to speak to everybody, we hope that you'll be able to at least link in with some of the people that you met this evening. So it just basically ends with us here now to say thank you to Sarah and to all our speakers for joining us and our alumni for joining us. And of course, thanks to BMO Capital Markets, Boston Consulting Group, IBM, and Heidrick and Struggles for being our WIM 100 sponsors. If this is your first time, which I'm sure it's not, joining one of our WIM events, Women in Mining UK is a volunteer-run non-profit organization which promotes the employment, retention, and progress of women in the mining industry industry, and everyone is of course welcome to become a member of WIM UK regardless of gender or where you are located in the world. So please spread the word. Go to our website and join us now. Membership is free. And our next and final WIM 100 regional networking event is scheduled for the 9th of December at 4 p.m. Please look out for the invitation, as that will be going out shortly. It's been an absolute pleasure hosting all of these WIM 100 events this year, throughout the year, and we'll be very sad to say goodbye to the online format. However, watch this space, because we are going to be releasing news about WIM 100 events in 2022, which will be in person. Don't forget, we have another WIM 100 publication coming out next year. That will be the 2022 cohort. And then at the same time, we have that WIM 100 LinkedIn group. So if you still haven't received your invitation to join us, please let us know, and we'll make sure that we get you an invitation to join that. And in the meantime, I know how busy your schedules are, and some of us have to jump off and get onto another webinar. Wherever you're dialing in from, we wish you a wonderful rest of your day. Take care, and goodbye from all of us here in London.